Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today on our talk about securing the cloud, talking about shared responsibility in SaaS security. I got my honored guest for the day, Mr. Henry Timm, or as the French say, Henry Timm. Henri, how are you
Hello
doing
and
today?
bonjour. Ça va bien? Et toi?
Henry, tell me all about yourself. What do you do for a living?
So I am the owner of Phantom Technology Solutions, which is an MSP based in northern Indiana. But I also own a few other technology companies and pretty involved in various nonprofits throughout the industry.
Fantastic. I got a warm up question for you. So you're from the Chicago-ish area. I'm not gonna OSIT you too hard here. Deep dish or Chicago pub style? What's your preferred pizza method?
Oh, absolutely, the pub style. I probably will get lose my Chicago card here, but yeah, not a fan of the deep dish. If I wanted a pie, I would certainly order something else.
You heard it here first. Deep dish. It's not a pizza.
No.
All right, let's get down to brass tacks here. We're talking about cloud security. So let's talk a little bit. So feel like for at least 10 to 15 years, right? There's been a push to move to SaaS applications, right? We used to just have, it would just be web apps or whatever we would call it, but like it got all fancy, it put on a top hat, started calling itself SaaS. It got all fancy on us, right? But the last, say, 10 years has been a huge push, right? Like get off from, put all your responsibilities somewhere else. But like with that, with great risk comes great responsibilities, right? So tell me a little bit, Henry, from your perspective, like what is shared responsibility? What does it look like in the cloud? And like let's define it a little bit for the audience.
So the idea of the shared responsibility model is kind of this concept of just defining who is responsible for what at the end of the day. So as we've migrated to the cloud, that includes defining things like who's responsible for the physical infrastructure, the data, who's in charge of securing the data, applying patches, managing identities, and so forth. So, shared responsibility model or matrix is going to identify what your cloud provider, in the case of SaaS, what they're responsible for versus the end user.
Yeah, because things change, right? When everything was on prem, we had a clear definition of like who was responsible for what, and it was either the business or in some cases the IT provider if they were providing like hardware as a service, etc. But then like with the explosion of cloud, right? You have infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and all the other whatever marketing terms you want to use around that, like identity as a service and et cetera, right? So like it gets a little more complex, and as part of that like business relationship you have to understand where your boundaries are at, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think a key part in doing that, aside from having data flow diagrams, is developing a RACI matrix. Those unfamiliar, that's roles and responsibilities matrix. So identifying exactly who the responsible parties are and what they're responsible for.
Yeah, it's been it becomes a challenge, right? Because we said as whenever start to move all these services off, we're like, oh, it's so much easier. I don't have to worry about any of this stuff, but like you still have to worry a little bit, right? So
Yeah.
you still have a risk. It's just like who I guess owns the risk is a little different. So how do you manage that risk whenever you deal with a cloud provider? Like what do you do before you sign the contract, and what do you do while like I guess your contract's still active or your service is still active? Let's start with the first one. What do you do? Right, you're looking at a cloud vendor or a cloud application, whatever SaaS application. What do you do before you sign that contract?
So the first thing I'm doing is looking to see if what they do have defined as part of their SRM. Most cloud providers do have an SRM publicly available on their websites, such as Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and so forth. And seeing where they draw the boundaries of other responsibilities. Most of those are pretty similar. But there are some caveats to look out for, specifically, again, around who's applying the patches, some of the security management, identity management, and so forth. Um, if it's an environment that I am unfamiliar with, I would say one of the first things is if we're going into a client is getting visibility first, because inevitably there are going to be people on the team that are using cloud providers or cloud software that IT is unaware of. So getting that visibility first and foremost is probably going to be a big part of it too, so we can actually define what we need to figure out responsibilities for.
Yeah, nothing even talking about all the AI buzzword, right? Like your chat GPTs, your Groks, your Geminis, your perplexities or whatever, right? Like that's a whole other challenge you're dealing with, like that you probably didn't have to deal with a year or two ago. All right. So let's talk about security practices, right? Like if you could give me with your top 5 security practices in cloud environments, right? From authentication to uh, the data limitations or et cetera. Like give me 5. I'm gonna try to keep us on track here to make sure we only talk about 5. But like, what are your 5 must-have security practices when you're dealing with cloud applications or cloud services?
First and foremost is that there's multi-factor authentication. Hopefully, there is some delineation or separation of roles as well, so that you can establish some type of least privilege access for the various accounts. Um, I would also be looking at our patch management in those situations, and what our ongoing alerting and auditing looks like for those different systems as well.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of people don't think about is like alerts. So like what happens when something falls outside the normal scope or a service is down or an incident happens or whatever, how am I alerted? And various methods, right? Like there's status pages, email, Teams messages, snail mail, hopefully that still exists.
Smoke signal.
Yeah. Smoke signal. Your life alert button goes off, whatever method that you have, right? Not something that not a lot of people think about, especially with SaaS. They just say like, all right, I signed up, I paid my $10 a month or whatever for my SaaS application. I don't have to worry about it again. But there's a lot that goes into it, especially when something goes bad. So let's talk a little bit about incident response in cloud services, which happens a lot more than most people think, right? Business email compromises, data leakage, et cetera, right? So like, what do you do? So an incident happens, and traditionally, right, you'd go to the affected device and you do forensics or log files or whatever, but you don't
Yeah.
have access to that in the cloud. So what do you do?
Well, first and foremost, you hope that you have your incident response actually documented in the first place.
What if my
A lot of
incident response
organizations
plan?
don't.
What if my incident response plan is in SharePoint and SharePoint goes offline?
Well, hopefully you had a hard copy. If you didn't, I think that's what we call the resume generating event.
Prepare 3 letters. That's the favorite one. No, but that's it's you
No,
nailed
it
it. So,
happens though.
yeah. Yeah, and like you're having a nailed down incident response plan and going through the actions a little bit, like with tabletop exercises or whatever, knowing your limitations and going like, oh, we didn't think about that. And
Yeah.
then having and then refining your plan, saying, oh, yeah, we gotta get a little bit better, or like start poking holes in your own plan too, right? So we can always recover to alternate site, right, or something like that, or a hot site. It's like, okay,
Yep.
how long does that take? Have you tested it? When was the last time
Well,
you actually tested
and
that?
what if one of your vendors or software solutions goes down for an extended period of time? That you, one that we were tabletopping the other day had to do with password manager. So yes, you can back up manually your password manager, but are all of your clients doing that? And what happens if you can't just re-import that into the same password manager because they're offline for a day? How do you handle those scenarios? So
Yeah.
yeah,
And-
tabletopping is a big part of it.
Yeah, and on top of that, right, just for instance, password managers, you have a backup of it. That you gonna how do you get into a usable format? Do you have to then turn it into like a CSV file or an Excel file? And then now you got to go reset all those passwords again. So you could either keep it in its encrypted format just as a backup in case, but once you crack that encryption and you have it into a different format, then you got to go change all those passwords. And that's a pain in the butt as well. So like walking through exactly what you got to do. Um,
Yeah. Well, in
yeah.
a lot of thing, or I guess another thing that as we transition to cloud, we've had to kind of reevaluate what some of our um, DR timelines look like, because you do run into bottlenecks at times too. Because if you're unable to restore to the same region or same platform, you may be looking at a very long extended time to get back online. And have you tested that? Do you know what that time actually looks like?
Yeah, it also changes like again your toolage a little bit because like again 10 years ago we were worried so much about endpoint, like everything was on the endpoint, like yeah, the endpoint protection, yeah, they locked down, but then now your monitoring tools, almost most of them come with some kind of third party integration or some kind of ability to ingest data or something from your cloud application. So that's a whole other it's a whole other amount of knowledge and education and training that you have to do for people to be able to parse that type of information and be able to understand exactly what some of this means. What do you do around like partner education? So like partners or clients, whatever you want to call them, get all gung ho and heavy about an app that's going to revolutionize their business. It's going to make things easier and it integrates with Office 365 and everything else. And you got to tell them, all right, well, let's talk a little bit about security. Let's throw some water on
Yeah.
those birthday candles you're about to blow out. So I'd have that
So
conversation with them.
we try to be proactive about this, and we of course ran into this with everyone wanting to adopt AI as fast and as quickly as possible, and um, had to have that conversation of, we're not going to assume the risk or enable the risk of you enabling these services without doing the due diligence and the work that you need to. And let's talk about that. Here's the business risk of putting these things in place. So, in the case of AI, let's talk about data classification. A lot of organizations haven't done that. And so they don't realize that they would be making effectively all of their data accessible to all employees. And that very quickly gets them to change their tune and pay attention. Um, but I think putting any type of education in a business outcome or business risk type of discussion is going to garner a much better response than just saying, no, you can't do these things.
You don't want to be the no team, right? Like that's what we
Yeah.
used to call us that when I was working internal IT. They're like, you just tell us no all the time. And we're just like, well,
You got that spray bottle of water to, yeah.
yeah, so again, like there's the discussion around security though with cloud too. It changes, right? Like we learn things, I feel like daily or weekly about what we should or shouldn't be doing. How do you have a security conversation with you as an MSP, put your MSP hat back on? So how do you have a conversation with the vendor around their security practices, right? So like, and what they're doing to be iterative, especially when you hear of another vendor having a problem. Like, how do you turn around and have that conversation with your own vendors to make sure they're learning from other people's mistakes? I guess.
Yes. Well, so we try to have a pretty strict due diligence process that we do with our vendors, and periodically do reviews on that. Um, and as part of that, we do have an extensive questionnaire about security. That said, um, there's always going to be things that pop up or things that change. And so we try to make it very clear about what our objectives are with our security program with our vendors, so that we can kind of tackle things together. So it's not, they feel less defensive when we're having those discussions. And it's more of, how can we attack this problem together, so that we can, help everyone involved. I think another part of that is um, aligning to different frameworks. And if the vendor has already done the work to show that they map to those frameworks, that's going to be hugely beneficial, not just to your MSP, but to all the MSPs that they are interacting with. Um, and I think that there are some additional things that we request, and sometimes the vendor just absolutely is caught off guard and does not know, which can be concerning. But I think those are good discussions to have. A lot of times we'll find um, some API related issues or remnants of things that may have fallen by the wayside that just need to be brought to attention.
All right, final question because we're close to time right now. Um, if you have one, I don't know if I want to call it a monkey paw wish. I love using the monkey paw reference. We're not going to use that. If you had one birthday wish and you got rid of one bad security practice you see a lot of people doing, what would it be?
Ooh, not reusing passwords. I see so many people reusing passwords.
Yeah, and or they get the notification that like your password been a part of a breach, and they're just like, yeah, that was Amazon. It doesn't affect it doesn't affect
Uh-huh.
my bank password.
Yeah, yeah. No, if you're not using a password manager, please use one.
And don't reuse passwords. Yeah.
Yes, don't
Uh,
reuse passwords.
all right. Appreciate you, Henry, as always. If anybody needs to find you, not find you in real life, but like find you virtually, where can they find you? Because I can't even find you in real life. You're worse than Carmen San Diego some days.
Oh gosh, I don't know where I'm at most days in the real world. Um, the best way to find me digitally would probably be on LinkedIn. Just search Henry Timm. You can also go to henrytimm.com or find me in one of the many industry discords.
All right. Thank you so much, Henry. Appreciate your advice, your expertise, your friendship, and your ability to grow a beard way better than I could.
Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Henry. Have a good one.
Thanks.